Welcome, everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of Politics and Tech. As always, joined by Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors. Kevin, glad you're here.
Yep, we got some interesting developments this week.
Oh, boy, don't we? So let's get started, actually, with state revenue updates. Kevin, can you start us there, please?
Yeah. So good news, and I need to be careful on this because those of you that know one of our co-founders, Jerry Shelton, who is an economist and also was the CFO at the California Department of Education for some time, is always really cautious about good numbers. So he just basically says, yeah, they're there, but we need to be careful. We got a long haul ahead of us. But the bottom line is I'm optimistic, and I like going into this new fiscal year with the kind of numbers that we just got again. So for the second month in a row, as we get into this brand new fiscal year, we've got numbers that show that overall revenue is exceeding what was assumed in the Budget Act that was adopted by the legislature just 2 months ago. So now we're up to $5.7 billion ahead of what those budget estimates were. There's lots of different reasons for what might be driving that. Probably the most principal one is that you guys have heard us over and over again when we do our budget workshops talk about the fact that personal income is the biggest chunk of dough that we pay attention to in terms of overall revenue that comes in. But what drives personal income? People with, at the upper end of the economic strata, right? It's the rich folks. And the fact of the matter is, if that's what tends to tilt in one way or another, the direction of what's happening on revenues, then we know that folks that are in that, that high level of income are the ones that are probably the least impacted by COVID-19. So that's why you're not seeing the diminished revenue to the extent that I think the state was anticipating. We're still off of obviously prior year, but we're just better than what budget writers thought we would be in. And they were being deliberately conservative, which is a good thing. But we got a number of months ahead of us. I'll definitely take a cushion going into potentially not good times. We all have to be really careful and thoughtful about what kind of cuts might be ahead. At the very least, I wouldn't be budgeting for a COLA next year. And I know for some of you that's alarming, but we just have to be really, really careful. And we have yet to develop sort of what the game plan is on advocacy for next year, but we're going to have to ramp it up way earlier than we normally do. Normally, we'll wait to see what the governor produces in January and then start our advocacy efforts. We're going to have to start that, I think, before the governor's budget comes out, talking about the value of public education and talking about the need to try to avert any kind of cuts to schools. So that's the revenue picture, Tim. And I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, well, so good news or potentially good news. And I think just based on the fact that we had those $25 billion in deferrals to kind of keep the budgets the way they were this year, eventually we're going to have to figure that out. So if we have an extra $5 billion and that stays true, that'll help us in that regard. So we'll keep a watch on that. Thanks for bringing that up. On the tech side of things, I just want to say there's been continued notable outages, and you may have experienced this week, but Google Hangouts, Google Classroom actually went down for the day. Google Meet, not for the day, but for a portion of the day this week. Also, Tesla and their infrastructure went down this week. So if you're having outages, you're having tech challenges, you're not the only one. There are a lot of people struggling right now. Sometimes because of cyber criminals, and other times it's simply because of technology challenges. But again, you have to just sort of give yourself a break as you're running into trouble and tell yourself the largest companies in the world are struggling. You naturally are going to run into some of those struggles as well. And I believe I mentioned it last week, but I'll say it again because it needs some emphasis. If you haven't thought of a backup plan for when your network goes down, for when your teacher's connectivity is down, you really need to have that backup plan in place. You may not have had a lot of chance to think proactively, but this is worth the effort because every time a teacher goes down, that's lost instructional time with your students. Every time your network goes down at site, if you have teachers there, that's several teachers going down at once. Make sure you ask your team, do we have a backup in place for our teachers and our sites if they go down? So with that, I want to move on to the stopgap budget deal impact for school meals. Kevin, can you fill us in on that, please?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to just add to your prior point is that we do need to also make sure that policymakers, the staff at the Capitol that are writing trailer bill language and are responsible for some of the way this language came out regarding some of the audit requirements on the year, understand that issue of those outages, because as they go after school districts and try to take a look at compliance, I'm not so sure how much the policy really reflects an understanding of some of those variables that districts cannot control. So we're going to have to take some of the data that we get about outages that are happening across the year and make sure they're aware of that, so school districts don't get unfairly penalized. So with that, move on to this other issue. So Congress has managed to get an agreement with the White House, with their Senate colleagues, so the House, the Senate, and the White House together on a stopgap sort of budget solution for this year. It's a continuing resolution to kick the can down the road a little bit to the end of the year to make sure that the government does not end up shutting down. So while they were getting that deal done, embedded in the deal that was sort of thrown in there was actual action that is agreed to by all three parties, and will be acted upon, we believe, on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week by the U.S. Senate to concur in what the House has done to actually help us on the school meal issue. So you know that in a prior broadcast, we announced that very happily that Secretary Pardue, as a result of the inaction of Congress, took it upon himself to actually, with the Secretary's broad waiver authority, and actually extend the waivers that we had on the summer meal program for the rest of the current calendar year. Well, the House's action and the three-part deal that's got the Senate and the White House involved in it would actually move that all the way to next September, the end of next September. So we're going to have that flexibility all the way into the fall of next year, which is really a wonderful development. So that should be great. What I have heard from some districts is we need to hope that CDE catches up real quick, which I know they will, and get guidance out that reflects that deal. And you can see as soon as the president signs this, I know you're going to hear from CDE right away that will modify that guidance so that you know you're going to be good till all the way to the end of September of next year. So that's the news on that.
Thanks, Kevin, and we'll keep our eye on that for sure, as we need more support there long term. So just want to bring up the fact that last week we were discussing the stimulus and how unlikely it seems. The fact that Trump had come out and backed a $1.5 trillion proposal, bipartisan proposal. We've heard some more talk this week. It seems very unlikely, but still maybe a faint heartbeat of a chance for a new stimulus here in the near term. Can you give us a little update, Kevin, on what you're hearing and on the stimulus and likelihood?
Yeah, it was mentioned that, again, you know, the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, talked about the fact that he'd had almost 20 conversations with Pelosi over the last couple of days. And this was just talked about yesterday, which is Thursday, about the fact that they said, hey, we did this. Let's see if we can't, before the end of next week, do something on a stimulus package where we might be able to reach agreement. So she'd put out the call to a lot of her leadership in her caucus in the House of Representatives to actually mark up some ideas that would take some shape as an alternative that I think reflect some of the issues that a number of members of Congress, but including Democrats who are feeling the pressure from back home, to get something done. So we've heard that the price tag of this renewed kind of proposal by Pelosi is $2.4 billion, still a big one, still exceeds what even Donald Trump said that he would support, although he's definitely raised the bar, as we mentioned last week. But again, you know, I'm optimistic that these conversations keep building on the prior conversation that was just had, and that maybe we get something. So that there seemed to be some optimism in that conversation, and we keep saying that week to week, but you know, we're going to know, you know, what the circumstances are very soon, because they're going to be breaking for the rest of the year so they can go back and campaign. So we'll end up seeing kind of what the result is. And then, as I've mentioned before, you know, when the lame duck comes back after the election, and regardless of the outcome of the election, I think there's going to be a renewed interest in doing something that's stimulative, whether it's Trump or Biden. No question about it that if it's Biden, we will get a big shot of money, not just for states, which is when the big hang up, but we would see an education package and probably a state bailout package. That would be the best thing for us in California, because in addition to impacting the deferrals and other things that are going to continue to occur if we don't get stimulus from the feds that has a state-oriented dimension to the package, but we could potentially get another shot of some flexible funding for K-12 schools beyond some of those budget fixes, which would be great. And we really could use it. We've tried to emphasize to members of Congress, we actually need some support that helps us lay a foundation for some insulation for next school year, because we don't have that right now. We really need it. Impacting the deferrals and giving us some extra money that we could actually store away would be really great.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And I'll just add that I thought it was sort of an interesting move. The Fed came out and said, advocated for stimulus to be passed because they're seeing the writing on the wall. If we don't get some sort of support here nationally, we're going to have some serious ramifications to deal with. So beyond what we're already dealing with. So we'll keep our eye on that and keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully, when we're on this thing next week, we can be talking about the stimulus that passed. Otherwise, it's going to be a long wait. With that in mind, let's talk about some props that never were. We talked about a prop last week. We'll do a little update on that again this week. But there was a Broadband for All initiative. We talked about it months ago, and that sort of went quietly into the night, was replaced by Governor Newsom's executive order for broadband. When you look at the fine print on what that executive order details, it was sort of strange. But Kevin, can you talk about just sort of that proposal and where you think it went? And then let's talk about, I guess, the other side of that for us, what that means.
Yeah, Senator Lena Gonzalez had her SB 1130, Broadband for All. And I mean, it had a lot of support out there, certainly in the education community. And I think it might have been more a casualty of legislative process than it was about policy. And that is that on the last night of session, they had a number of bills in the queue that almost everybody thought had the votes to pass. And I think this could have been one of those that they just didn't get to by midnight. And so you can be sure that she'll be running that legislation again next year. But the trend that you and I have talked about is that whether it's the federal level or the state level, there's all this energy around doing something that helps to try to pump more resources into technology, into education, in particular technology, given our challenges with distance learning. And they all end up falling flat, whether they're spending initiatives. We've had, a very big part of stimulus that was floated earlier on, and it's just sort of went away in the succeeding conversations about stimulus. You barely hear any more conversation about tech. They've just kind of fallen by the wayside. And you might remember, in fact, you were the one that kind of queued this up in a conversation we had on this broadcast some time ago. It was one of our very early broadcasts about the effort that was being made here in California by Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi, contemplating actually a tech bond just for schools, an ed tech bond. I mean, that thing probably would have passed no problem if the legislature had been focused on it and he had been successful in getting that in front of the voters. But, it wasn't meant to be. And obviously, we just need to put more focus on these issues to get our elected officials kind of aligned to its importance. So the one thing you did mention, though, Tim, is that the stuff that's actually been put out there by the administration and by the CDE, I mean, it looks like nothing more than a veiled sort of marketing pitch for products that, we've drawn your attention to as viewers, because we look at it and we think the market actually has competitive pricing that even beats what you find there. So I'm not really sure how big a favor they're doing us by putting kind of packages and products there that, in my view, aren't even that competitive. But, they're big players in the tech industry, but people really need to check out what the pricing is and not just take it at face value, that because they're seeing on a government website for the state of California that it must be the best deal available. That is definitely not the case. I think it's definitely great that they're trying to make an effort to get solutions out there that you can look at. But like any good superintendent CBO, you should have a little bit of skepticism before you go headlong into it.
Yeah, and I'll just say we're seeing federal action on this. Like we're seeing, Congress like advocating for broadband for all nationally. They're saying it's, competitive advantage for us in the world. We need this for education and so on. And they're worried about urban and rural access. We're seeing states like South Carolina passing broadband for all initiatives, basically changing the laws around where you can, how you can use city and county-owned towers to put up your own networks. I mean, we're seeing other states and federal action towards this, but in the largest state in the country, we had at least a couple initiatives that were there, and now they're gone, and we're replaced with a list of where to go buy stuff. So that doesn't necessarily solve all challenges. Hopefully, we'll see some more action on this soon, and hopefully, we'll get some of that federal support we've been looking for to help solve these challenges that we're facing in the state. So with that, Kevin, I know we spent a little bit of time on Prop 15 last week, and Jack was talking about some of the polling and how it was looking pretty good. Can you share the latest on polling on that proposition, please?
Yeah, the Institute for Government Affairs at UC Berkeley does polling, and they've got a poll out this week that shows, it's very similar results to what we saw that Jack outlined last week with PPIC, but I just thought it was newsworthy. Wanted to make sure viewers had the update on the exact latest polling data, which actually shows it falling short of the 50% mark. So it's 49% support. The rest are opponents or undecided. So there's a lot of work that the proponents have to do to get this thing over the finish line. One of the things that they did note in the analysis of that poll, though, what's interesting is that the opposition, not surprisingly, comes from older white voters, people that have more money. So younger voters, and it's kind of a generational shift, it's very clear, are prepared in really pretty big numbers, impressive numbers, to revisit Prop 13, which this ballot measure does. So it's going to be interesting to see that maybe this might not be the year for this, but there is definitely generational shift where people realize that schools need help, there's other services that need help, and there are big subsidies right now for big business in terms of property tax that's inherent in Prop 13 that voters definitely want to revisit. But the business community is on the air big time every single day. There are a lot of other titans in politics that are got their ballot measures that they're doing stuff on. Uber and Lyft are doing their Prop 22. And there's a lot of ballot measures. There's the dialysis one. A lot of money is being spent on airtime. So the question is the most of the messages you're hearing about Prop 15 are negative messages. It's the opposed campaign. And when the yes side gets up on the air, will they be able to get enough attention in this sea of political ads to get voters' attention and get the support they're going to need to pass this? They've got a lot of work to do for sure.
All right, well, we'll keep our eye on this. And actually, next week, just to keep this brief, we'll dig into Prop 24, which is the data privacy law or data privacy proposition, and how that could impact you starting in November if that legislation passes. So we'll dig into that next week. And Kevin, just wrap up on a couple of things here. You had a webinar you wanted to mention. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, one of the things that early on when the legislature did the budget trailer bill for education, and we were getting the guidance about distance learning, there was a lot of confusion and controversy around what are they or not doing. What are they doing? What are they not doing relative to independent study? And so the California Consortium for Independent Study is actually going to do a webinar on October 16th where they're going to get into this so that they give the field some guidance. And I think it's extremely important. I mean, this would be the thing that maybe you would normally just see a lot of folks that dabble in independent study gravitate to, but I think there are lessons learned for everyone. So this is a good one for superintendents, CBOs, curriculum instruction folks. We'll have a link this week to the California Consortium for Independent Studies website, so you guys can look it up and check it out. But that should be a very informative workshop.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, sounds like something that's definitely worth putting on the calendar. And just also something we called out last week. Our team at Digital Advisors worked with Small School Districts Association to answer some of the questions that were coming in from a lot of their superintendents who are feeling the pain of distance learning and remote education right now. So we answered some of the top questions that were coming into the organization on a YouTube video, which is actually on our channel. And I'll just say we're going to email it out to our clients. Kevin, we'll probably include that in the email out to your clients this week. And we'll look forward to folks sort of chiming in taking advantage of that, because I think the districts of any size could actually benefit from watching that. And with that, I just want to say thanks, everybody, for watching these broadcasts. If you have a moment, please click subscribe. It should be right here over my finger. And please share in social media that you enjoyed these broadcasts. Reshare, add some comments. And as always, if you have questions, send them in to Kevin and I. We'd be happy to answer them on a future broadcast. So with that, Kevin, thanks very much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll catch you next week.
Great. Same to you, Tim. Bye-bye now.